11 Eastern, thank you for joining us on Two-Way today. We scheduled this to be the day after Super Tuesday, the day before the State of the Union address. And we're going to talk about both of those things with a focus today primarily on the presidential race. But we've also got some news that we didn't necessarily expect. Mitch McConnell this morning endorsing Donald Trump. Dave McCormick, who's running for Pennsylvania Senate seat held by Bob Casey, endorsing Donald Trump. And Nikki Haley this morning suspending her campaign, leaving no doubt about the matchup for the general election. So we're going to talk with some of the contributors here at Two-Way. Amie Parnes and Noah Rothman are both here. Mark McKinnon's here as well. And there's a bunch of people who've joined, I'm grateful to say, who we're also going to want to hear from. So we're going to take a lot of your questions. But first, I just want to set up a little bit and play for you Nikki Haley from just a few minutes ago, a short withdrawal speech laying out where she stands in terms of her future agenda. You could roll Nikki Haley, please.
Good morning. Just over a year ago, I launched my campaign for president. When I began, I said the campaign was grounded in my love for our country. Just last week, my mother, a first-generation immigrant, got to vote for her daughter for president, only in America. I am filled with the gratitude for the outpouring of support we've received from all across our great country. But the time has now come to suspend my campaign. I said I wanted Americans to have their voices heard. I have done that. I have no regrets. And although I will no longer be a candidate, I will not stop using my voice for the things I believe in.
So she didn't endorse Donald Trump. She didn't say much new, and the tone is pretty familiar to anybody who's followed her. Amie, where do you think this is headed? Is she going to be, as I think, a keynote speaker at the convention, or is she going to continue to be an agitator for the part of the party that doesn't want Donald Trump?
I think she realizes what's happened, obviously, that it is still the party of Trump, and she's going to need to get there eventually, but she's going to take her time, and I think continuing to be the alternative, to be the agitator, as you say. And, you know, she was the only one standing at the end who was willing to kind of hold his feet to the fire and say, this is how we're different. This is what he's done. You see President Biden going in this morning and saying there is a place for your supporters. If you don't want to support the former president, come support me. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out and how Biden makes a play for Haley supporters and what she continues to do if she is sort of the agitator that keeps people away from Trump, the remaining, these undecided voters who would support her.
No, I think you might be muted. Yeah,
I am muted, but I'm not anymore.
Ahead,
I'd be very curious to hear, Mark, your how you think the mechanics of Haley's return to the fold would work. Everything we're hearing out of her is that you need to come to me, not the other way around. Likewise, what we've been hearing out of the Trump camp, in particular, Donald Trump's hand-picked successor to co-chair the RNC, is that if you don't genuflect before the movement, you're out. Yeah. Who breaks first? Right. In your assessment?
Well, the other piece of news from this morning is what reinforces the view I had last night that she is going to break, because Mark McKinnon, who bent the knee this morning, to use Donald Trump's phrase, Mitch McConnell. If Mitch McConnell can endorse Donald Trump at this point, what makes anybody think Nikki Haley can't?
Yeah, the message I got this morning is it's only a matter of time. All the body language is there for a future endorsement. I mean, the bad news is that there is no sort of alternative Republican Party anymore. There's no resurrection anymore. Trump 100% takeover is now complete. The good news, I guess, is that Nikki Haley will strategically try and use that leverage. And my hope is that, I mean, I have no hope that Donald Trump will recognize the importance here, but that Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles and John McLaughlin will, yep. that they need Nikki Haley's voters to win in November, and that they'll that they will, convince Donald Trump to adroitly maneuver Nikki Haley back into the fold.
Yeah, he's not going to do what Joe Biden did with Bernie Sanders and adopt, sending troops to Afghanistan or, cutting Social Security or restraining the growth of Social Security, I should say. But I think he'll pay some lip service. The staff will pay some lip service, and they will take the door she's opened. I mean, she said, pay attention to our voters. They want to pay attention to her voters. They want her voters. And if the price of that is for Donald Trump to once again defy people's view of him as someone who always holds a grudge, he'll drop a grudge if it's in his interest to drop the grudge. And I can't think of anything more in his interest right now than to stop the storyline and the practical challenge of bringing back people who voted in Republican primaries. They don't want the George Soros spies who came in and voted in those primaries, but they want everybody else.
But do you guys see her supporters coming around? Because I wonder about that. I wonder if these are the holdouts that could ruin it one way or another.
I also think that assumes far more discipline on the part of the primary, on the part of the principal in this race, than we've seen from him over the last 8 years. If past his prologue, he can maintain discipline for all of 24 hours. That's about it.
Well, he just needs enough discipline to get a deal with her, right? He doesn't need to spend every day with her. And he's forgiven plenty of people who've done worse to him from his point of view than Nikki Haley's. I don't know that it's a sure thing, but that's the way it's headed. Let me just set the stage here for the hour we're going to spend together, and then I want to talk with you three about State of the Union. For those of you who are new to this format, we'll talk a bit amongst ourselves, but we're going to want to take your questions. It's a big part of it. We prefer your cameras on and your microphones muted unless you're called on to speak. And then you can ask a question, make a comment. You can direct it anywhere you want. We believe in civil dialogue here. We believe in people talking about ideas that matter to the whole country. And you'll hear some people, I'm sure, on this who you disagree with and some you might agree with. But the point of this is not to fight about it, but to understand each other and what's at stake. And what we're talking about now is at a pretty critical moment for the Trump campaign. You can find Democrats in the Biden campaign put out a memo today, 5 pages basically saying this race is tied, we're going to win. But most Democrats who are honest will admit they're behind right now. And they're getting a lot of advice about both through the public communication, but also privately about in the Biden world about what they need to do. And one big piece of advice is he needs to be out there more. The president needs to be out there more, showing he's got energy, he's got fight, he's got passion, he's got better ideas than Donald Trump. And obviously, with the exception of his convention speech and any debates, tomorrow night is the biggest platform he'll have. So, Amie, what are you hearing about what he's going to do in terms of policy, performance, and trying to show the worried Democrats that he's got all those things?
I mean, they know, Mark, that this is a big moment for them. They know that they're behind in the polls. The president knows he's behind in the polls and is frustrated and has expressed his frustration many, many times in recent weeks. And so it's BS when you hear people say, oh, we're ahead, we're ahead. They know they're behind right now. And this is not where they want to be against a guy who has 91 criminal counts and all this against him. So they need to turn the page tomorrow and try to do something to try to communicate a little better. They have failed, and I've said this repeatedly, they've failed in communicating their message and communicating what exactly they've done in the last few years. There are people who still feel like the economy is not where it should be, that they're paying more at the grocery stores. They're going to need to explain more about where they were, what they tried to do, how they brought things around on the economic front, and then talk about other issues that are really hurting him right now, including Israel and Gaza and where that stands. We saw the implications yesterday on that. Immigration is another issue that could be a second-tier issue that is really dogging them right now. They need to do better there. And if they're being honest with you, they'll tell you that they know that they need to communicate all of these things a little bit better.
Yeah, let me pick up on what you just said. And I'm a big believer in not just sort of cynically, reflexively second guessing the communications choices of these professionals who helped him get elected and who are running the government and the DNC and the campaign. But take the border visit, okay? It seems to me that you want to work backwards in these things and reverse engineer and say, what do we want the headline to be? What do we want voters to learn about Joe Biden's border visit? And that requires, because the way the news media works, doing something new, the first 3 letters of news, NEW. What was the new thing he did at the border? He said, I'll work with Donald Trump. Let's work together to solve this problem. I mean, that's not a real thing. He has no expectation of working with Donald Trump. So Mark McKinnon, in preparing for the State of the Union, what should the news he wants to make be? Or is the news simply he's vigorous like he was last year and he performs well? Is that good enough to be the news, or should there be some other news they make?
Well, vigor is important, Mark. Vigor is very.
Vigor is important. I always say that.
A couple observations. I mean, one, it's called the bully pulpit
Mark may have frozen.
opportunity, and we get a few of those in every election. So it is a big opportunity. The thing that strikes me is that voters know a lot about both these candidates. They know a lot about where they've been and where they are. They don't know a lot about where they intend to go. They know a little bit about where Donald Trump might go because of Project 2025 and other sort of, leaked ideas about what the administrative plans are for Trump. But we don't know a lot about Biden 2024 and what that vision is. So I think this is a real opportunity to show both vigor and a vision.
Yeah, I wonder
Vigor
what
and vision.
Wonder what the vision would be. Noah, if you're the Trump campaign, if you're the Biden campaign, you're worried if Trump's talking about immigration or if he's talking about NATO. Or maybe they don't think that, but certainly immigration. I think they should be worried about NATO, but they're not. If you're the Biden campaign, what can Biden talk about besides abortion? What can he talk about where it strikes fear in the Trump folks and say, boy, we really don't want to be on that terrain?
That's a good question. In policy terms, it seems like the president is more focused on engaging progressives, mollifying progressives who want to see big things out of the federal government, and sort of trying to jujitsu voters into thinking that inflation really isn't as much of a problem as it used to be. And insofar as it is, it manifests in things like shrinkflation, just kind of a nuisance, but it just, it manifests itself in less potato chips in the bag, which is counterproductive, because what Joe Biden needs to do is to convince voters that inflation is a thing of the past. Insofar as he can do that, communicate to the public that inflation is receding, indeed almost behind us, that would probably advance his objectives more than demonstrating to them that inflation is manifesting in this way that's frustrating you and in that way that's frustrating you, and it's not really my fault, which seems to be their communication strategy. Overall, what Joe Biden needs to do on Tuesday or Thursday night, rather, is communicate and convey vigor. And you can do that by watching the speech without the sound. What he needs to do is express himself physically as a presence who's competent, capable, and not in his senescence. And in order to, what the Biden seems to want to do is to go Donald Trump into being in public with the understanding that the more voters see of him, the less they like of him. But in order to do that, he himself needs to be out in public. It's in a very difficult position for him. But I'm not listening for policy specifics. I'm watching body language.
75% of people right now, including Democrats, think that he is too old to run. And I think that's the big elephant in the room tomorrow, Mark.
This Biden-Trump, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. This Biden-Trump matchup obviously is weird and historic and warps our normal understanding of how presidential races work. It has been the case with John Kerry, with Mitt Romney, and with Bob Dole that the incumbents were in trouble, and if the challengers were acceptable, if they crossed over the threshold of an acceptable alternative, that they would win. And of course, the strategy of the three incumbents who won, more Bush and Obama than Clinton, but it's applicable to Clinton at least a bit as well, was they disqualified them. They made John Kerry the flip-flopping windsurfer. They made Mitt Romney the Grey Poupon ordering, out-of-touch plutocrat. In this case, it seems to me what Biden needs to do, not just tomorrow night, but consistently, is to clear the board of acceptability on this question of vigor and age and governing. If he can convince people that yes, he still has the mental capacity to govern, I think he probably is on the path to winning. I still think he's got problems on the economy that Noah referenced, but that to me is sort of where he needs to get. I want to open it up to you all. We've talked for 15 minutes. I want to open it up. Mark McKinnon probably needs to reboot, not physically, but technologically. If you've got a question or a comment, I see Doug has his hand up, raise your electronic hand. We'll ask you to unmute. We'll call on you. Again, this is for you, the opportunity to talk to these great folks. You can make a comment, ask a question. try to restrict it if you can during this segment, if you can, to this question of the State of the Union, of Nikki Haley, of the current state of the race between the two. We're going to talk in a little bit about the Trump legal stuff and about RFK. So we will be talking about other topics. But let's try a little bit of a round of hearing from you. Doug Carey, your question. I ask you to unmute and question or comment for the group.
Good morning, Mark, to your team. Thank you very much for doing this again. I have many questions or comments, but in the schmuck mode, I'm just going to pick the one thing I want to say, and that is I really wonder if there's a risk of Nikki Haley voters voting for Biden. As somebody who's had a long history of voting for failed Republican candidates, from John Anderson in 1980 to John McKinnon in 2002, I didn't get a chance to vote for Nikki Haley now. I'm in Florida. I can never imagine myself voting for Biden. I can imagine myself voting for a no labels candidate, or I can imagine myself possibly voting for Trump if he could keep his mouth shut and stop calling Nikki Haley bird brain and his other infantile things. But I don't know. At this point, I don't think I'll stay home because I've voted in every election since I was eligible to vote. But it's really tough. So I'm just curious what your experts think.
Well, I'm curious why you wouldn't support Biden, first of all.
Well, first of all, I don't like his policies, but secondly, he just there's the physical approach. I mean, probably Biden's best strategy would be deliver a written State of the Union address. I mean, you say he's going to look, portray vim and vigor, but he doesn't. I mean, he should be already up there. I mean, just looking at the man walk with an ice cream cone. I mean, you got to be kidding. This guy's going to be president of the United States. I mean, at least Trump has that vim, has that vigor. He's got lots of other problems, but it's
Doug, we're going to turn you into a one-man focus group here.
Okay.
So you don't like Biden's lack of energy, and you said the thing you don't like about Trump is he uses mean nicknames. Are there other things you don't like about Trump?
Oh yeah, many things. I mean, I don't agree with his trade policies. I don't like the idea of tariffs. I don't like the idea of the extremely hard line against immigration. I don't think our borders should be open, but I don't think we should vilify people either.
And who'd you vote for? Who'd you vote for?
He's very protectionist. I'm much more of a globalist.
Who'd you vote for in 12, 16, and 20?
12, 16, I voted for Clinton. In 2020, I voted for Trump.
And who'd you vote for in 12, Romney or Obama?
Romney. The only Democrat I voted for before that was Clinton in '96. Otherwise, I've been basically like a Ronald Reagan Republican ever since I was a kid. For young Republicans, I was in college.
Got it.
What do you make of someone like RFK? Would you be swayed by someone like
possibly? I mean, if he's, I could see myself possibly vote him. I like the idea of Joe Manchin running, but obviously he's not doing that. I would love the idea of Romney running, but that's not going to happen either. Just as I say, I've got a long history. I mean, look at John Anderson. I mean, you guys are all too young, but John Anderson, 1980, was another really appealing candidate. But
Thank you for the question and the comment and the conversation. Other people have questions, comments, please raise your hand. I see some great folks on here I'd love to hear from, and I may call on you, but I'd rather take volunteers first. So if you've got a question or a comment, please raise your electronic hand. We will bring you in.
Well, while we're doing that, I'll
go ahead.
answer Doug's question. How many of these Nikki Haley protest voters in the early states and then Super Tuesday might turn out to be Biden voters or not show up at all? I think most likely you're looking at quite a few Biden voters. Just to survey the exit data, in those states where nonpartisan, non-registered Republicans could participate in these contests, you saw a lot of indicators that suggest they're Biden voters. They like the economy. They're not especially angry. They might approve of Joe Biden, the job that he's done. They're not reflective necessarily of what we would expect to be a Republican vote, much less a Trump vote. That being said, there's a significant minority of those voters who do line up with what we would expect to see in conventional Republican voters. And maybe let's say it's about a quarter of the Republican vote, the actual registered self-identified Republican vote in the early states and in states like Virginia and North Carolina that voted yesterday. Are those going to turn into Biden voters? I doubt it, based on what they're telling exit pollsters. But are they going to be enthused enough to come home in November? That's what Nikki Haley is proposing. she's saying to Donald Trump very explicitly today, it's your job to win these voters back. They're gettable for you. They're persuadable, but you must persuade them. I have very little faith in the candidate's capacity to do that. Perhaps his campaign, staffed by professionals like Chris Lasavita and Susie Wiles and others,
And with digital,
will have a plan for
with-
that, but
and
can
with
they execute it?
And with digital targeting as well. Right.
And it would all be negative. It would be explicitly
Yeah.
a negative campaign designed to say, not that you have to support this guy because you affirmatively support Trump, but you just can't stay home and let Joe Biden have another term.
Yeah. I mean, the two things I'd say that, Noah, that would cast some doubt, or three things that would cast some doubt on if you were the Trump people, you'd have to be concerned that this is going to be dispositive. One is, we don't really know who these people are. Some of them are voting in the, clearly some of them at least are voting in the primary. They were Biden voters in 20, but they're voting in the Republican primary. So they're not voters he's going to win over or needs to win over. Two is, as Mark Mellman talked with us on a previous episode, when somebody's going in the polling booth to vote for Nikki Haley, they're at their maximum moment of being reluctant to say they'd ever vote for Donald Trump because you know they're there to vote for Nikki Haley. And the related question about would you vote for someone who's a convicted felon? People say, well, up to 30% of Republicans say they wouldn't. How about the 70% who say they would? Like, that's, to me, that's a bigger number. Who's the 70% are telling pollsters, yeah, I'd vote for a convicted felon. That seems kind of extraordinary. And then lastly is you've got a choice election, right? And so these people, in the end, they're a lot of them are going to come home. That's what history
So
suggests.
this is where I'm at too, that there will be a process by which they'll rationalize themselves into voting for Donald Trump and subordinate their misgivings. That being said, we see already in general election polling that 90% of Republicans, give or take, are already with Donald Trump, up to and including this New York Times Siena poll over the weekend that said 97% of Donald Trump's 2020 vote is with him now. So how do you square these two things?
Well,
I would suggest that it's aspirational on the part of Republican voters. They want to come home.
I agree with you. But the last thing, which again, I think you have to say is Trump is ahead. So the same electorate that a slice of which is telling pollsters and exit polls, I'm a Haley voter and I'm not inclined to vote for Trump. Whatever subtraction there is from the universe of Trump support out of that subgroup, overall, Trump is winning. He's winning nationally, and he's winning in the battleground states. And of course, many of these exit polls are voters who aren't in battleground states, and I love them as citizens, but they're not going to pick the president. So as long as Trump is ahead, and he's consistently ahead, and as Amie said, the Biden people in private moments will honestly say he's ahead, whatever problems he has with Haley voters are not problems that are keeping him from currently amassing enough support to win. Mark, did you have your hand up? Mark McKinnon? You're muted, I believe.
I think that's a great observation, Mark, that those, Trump already has a huge slice of the pie, and of those voters who are gettable, they're more likely to go to Trump.
Yeah.
I often think too, the thing that we have two principles here that have run against each other. And I feel like it's baked in at this point. I know everyone says, oh, it's early, but everyone knows these two guys. People don't like them. So I wonder about it's early. I wonder, McKinnon, if you want to weigh in on that. Do you think that these people can change their minds?
Oh, that I think is the most depressing reality here is that what in the world are either of these campaigns going to say about each other over the course of the next, 7 months that we don't already know?
Yeah.
It's just going to be an echo chamber. This is the rerun that nobody wanted to see.
Exactly.
I want to bring in someone who's a suburban mom who cares about policy, if she's willing to come on camera. She also happens to be a former member of Congress, Nan Hayworth. Nan, are you willing to come on camera and answer a question from me? There you go. Thank you, Dr. Congresswoman. I see you have maybe you got your mic on, but not your camera. Nan, I'd love for you to talk about this moment in terms of Trump and Haley. You understand the Haley voter. A lot of your former constituents were like Nikki Haley supporters. Yes. Do you think she's headed towards being on the Trump train, or is not necessarily?
Oh, I think she could. Absolutely. I mean, she worked with him before, and they both worked very well together, actually. And politics, as I know well, but as everybody here knows, consists largely of strange bedfellows, because alliances depend on what our goals for the country are and what policy is, and that's always my emphasis. I understand why we concentrate on personalities, but it's policy that matters. You can have the nicest, I'm a surgeon, okay? You can have the nicest surgeon in the world. If he doesn't have hands, you're going to get a lousy result. Just as you can have somebody who has no bedside manner, but has great hands, and you're going to get a great result. You're going to be happier with that, even if they're not your best friend. We don't need a best friend. We do need someone who is going to directionally, and that's the other thing. It's all directional. It's all incremental. You can, wave your hands in rage at both parties, and I totally get it. Most of these representatives, by the way, are doing what their districts want them to do. So bear that in mind too. But it's really, really, really about policy. And I think what Americans are noticing, and this is what's especially alarming Democrats, is that communities they have heretofore taken entirely for granted, especially the Black community, are noticing that their policies are bad. You can't explain that away. It has to do with economics, and the laws of economics are like the laws of physics, and I'll shut up now.
Okay, I agree with you. And Noah said he was looking only for style tomorrow and not policy. I know I'm overstating a little bit what you meant, but I really do believe that Biden, the trick for Biden and the challenge is to simultaneously reassure people stylistically that he's up to it, but also then take the opportunity to say, and by the way, my economic ideas are better, and my immigration ideas are better. Because as we know from poll after poll, that's to me the most dangerous thing. I've said this before. Voters trust Donald Trump more on the economy and on immigration than they do Joe Biden. And part of that, I think, is sense of bad acuity, but part of it is projection of ideas. Pete, question from you.
Yes, and I was debating with Nan in the chat room a little bit regarding policy. As Nikki Haley has said, there was an $8 trillion addition to the debt during Trump. That was policy, okay, aside from the behavior. And while Nan was saying in the chat room, well, she was dealing with 60 votes in the Senate and so forth. Nonetheless, if you look at the history, Reagan and the Bushes exploded the deficit and debt far more than Clinton, Obama, and Biden. So I'm really tired of the Republicans debating about this deficit and debt issue when I see a lot of hypocrisy. So I could debate policy as much as this bad behavior.
Comment, Amie, Noah, Mark?
Yeah,
Thank
so
you,
just
Pete.
on both those things, Trump policy, Biden policy, just to refine my point on the State of the Union, if I see Joe Biden talk about policy, I expect he will do what he has done, which is to focus on revving the engines of the progressive base, which I don't think he needs to do, and I don't think is especially popular, but that's what he will and his people will be inclined to do.
So you don't think there'll be executive orders announced tomorrow on hardline immigration policy?
Oh, I don't expect him to talk about that at the State of the Union. No, if he did, I'd be very pleasantly surprised. But on the Trump stuff, just to pivot to that, Donald Trump is enjoying some gauzy reflections on the policies that he pursued as president, which were engineered by the architects of which are people he hates, and the feeling is absolutely mutual. The people who designed his economic policies, his tax policies, his hawkish policies towards Russia, even his immigration policies to a lesser extent, and it certainly is Israel policies, are people who have fallen out of favor of the Trump movement. And they were generic conservatives. These are the architects of the policies that made him popular. And they're not coming back. But Donald Trump doesn't really have to address that. He just gets to nod and wave in the direction of what was a successful first-term presidency by the people who made it a successful first-term presidency, and gets to elide the fact that none of those people are going to be in the fold if he returns to the White House.
Right. All right, I'm going to bring up a new topic. I see no additional hands raised, and I'll say again, folks, the whole point of this is to give you an opportunity to ask questions, to make your points as well. So if you've got a question on any of this stuff, please raise your hand. Here's a new topic I want to talk about, because I want to try to get ahead of what everybody is right now, which is on the issue of the Trump criminal cases. Seems pretty clear to me, as it has for a while, that we're not going to see a Florida case, we're not going to see a Georgia case, and probably not going to see the DC case, right? But we know that Alvin Bragg is coming up. People say that it's the quote unquote weakest case. I'm not really sure what they mean by that. I know that just talking about the crude raw politics of how Donald Trump operates, black prosecutor, Manhattan jury, he's going to have a lot to say if he's convicted that he thinks might even work in his favor. But let's just start with this. What does it mean What do reporters and legal analysts mean when they say it's the weakest case? Is it the least likely to get a conviction? Is it the charges, even if there's a conviction, won't matter to voters? What does that mean?
Well, when you're up against an insurrection and all these other cases that he has, I think the one with the porn star is sort of seen as the weakest case.
So weakest meaning even if he's convicted, voters will say, well, what does it matter? It was just about hush money in his personal life?
Exactly, which is so funny because with any other opponent, Democrats would be making hay over this and saying, look what happened. But, when you're talking about bigger things such as, Georgia and an insurrection and I think that's, even Democrats kind of roll their eyes as like, why was this case brought about first?
Right.
We had stronger issues. And I think that it's made the electorate more numb. And I think that's why that's annoyed a lot of Democrats too, who I've spoken to, because they say, oh, it's another case. It's another case. People aren't really paying attention.
There's another way.
Whereas
Let me just say one thing, if I could, real quick. There's another way where it's been called weakest by legal analysts, which is that the novelty of the charges, that this is not the kind of case that would normally be brought, and that so many of the charges are repeat charges based on the same legal theory. Sorry, Mark and then Noah.
No, I was just going to say, what do you suppose if you could be a fly on the wall with La Savita and Susie, which case do you think they'd want to have tried first?
Maybe now Georgia, but this one for sure, Noah.
Yeah.
If you talk to Republicans, they'll say it's the weakest case because of the prestidigitation that Alvin Bragg had to do in order to get this case into his jurisdiction. His predecessor, Cy Vance, looked at it and passed. Alvin Bragg campaigned on doing this and then appeared to not be willing to pull the trigger, only eventually to do so, and to do so in ways that really stretched the statute. So that's where Republicans are coming from this. Will you communicate that to swing voters who don't really follow any of that and have no understanding of how jurisdictions work in the Southern District of New York, for example? No. They're going to see what Republicans do is kind of throat clear and say, well, I mean, of course he kind of did it. He did it, but this shouldn't be prosecuting them in this fashion. Right. That's a difficult case to make for the average voter, who's going to see Donald Trump most likely get convicted on at least one of the many, many charges that Alvin Bragg spun out from precisely one transaction.
Well, but what makes you think he'll be convicted of at least one?
Because you would assume, and I am making assumptions here, that based on the nature of the jury pool, the nature of the charges against him, and the fact pattern that establishes that he did what he is alleged to have being accused of doing,
right.
It's only that they spun out this case into 34 felony counts as opposed to just being one transaction, that it shouldn't necessarily be in this jurisdiction. All of that is the sort of stuff that makes Republicans roll their eyes. It may not for independent voters.
Let me tell you two other ways it's weaker than the others, I think. I know I set up the straw man. I don't know why it's weaker, but here are two other ways I think it's weaker. One is, as I understand it, unlike the other cases where if there's a single conviction, he's likely to face, if not prison time, confinement time, the equivalent of a confinement sentence. As I understand it, even if he's convicted in this case, it's unlikely he'd be sentenced to confinement. So he'd still be a felon, but he wouldn't be stuck at Mar-a-Lago or stuck in Rikers Island or whatever. The second is, this case relies a lot on Michael Cohen, right? There is some documentary evidence, but Michael Cohen's going to have to testify. Michael Cohen, darling of MSNBC. Michael Cohen, turncoat on Trump, was loyal, now not. We don't use turncoat, I use that in air quotes. I just think the Trump people are going to have a pretty good success rate making this about Michael Cohen's credibility rather than any underlying evidence. I think that makes it a pretty weak case, and I think that's why the original look at this by the state prosecutors, they passed on it. I don't think they wanted to rely on Michael Cohen, and they didn't want to have the novel charges. So I don't know that this will be the only case to come to trial before the election. It'll certainly be the only case to come to trial before the convention, and probably before September. And I'm very skeptical the others will, and I have been for a long time. So if there is a conviction, we all can speculate about what that means. But what about if Noah's wrong? And what if there's a hung jury, or what if there's an acquittal? Do any of you have any doubt that that would be extraordinarily good for Trump politically? Anybody doubt that?
No.
No doubt.
No. And there's not zero chance of that, right?
No,
Not zero chance. There could be a mistrial. You know, there could be all sorts of things that could occur. You know, when Woody Hayes said he ran the football because when you pass, 3 things can happen and 2 of them are bad. When you try Donald Trump in a Manhattan courtroom with a DA who made it clear that he was out to get Donald Trump, I could think of a lot of things that would be bad for Joe Biden and good for Donald Trump. And really, the only thing that's good for Biden potentially politically is a conviction. And I'm not even sure that that's true, depending on how the conviction is spun. And we all know that even Ruth Marcus and other liberal legal analysts say this case is kind of bogus in terms of its legal rationale and precedent.
I would argue strategically, Mark, that if I were the Trump team, I'd want that case to happen.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Well, that
'cause
goes
he's
pretty
good at
well.
that.
Okay, so if that's true, then if you're saying lawfare in its totality, right? The premise that a lot of Democrats have had that these cases are going to help Trump. It sounds like what our consensus is: no case likely before the election, except for this one, and this one's good for Trump. So if you're tallying up lawfare, it seems like, again, our consensus is Trump 1, Biden 0, or 0-0, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look what he's done in the past. Every time this happens, he rallies around, he fundraises off of it. It's good for him. He likes that. He likes the attention on him. He sees this as, that it's all good press for him, essentially. And that's, he's king marketer and he loves this kind of thing. So I think it is a win-win for him. Even if you say, like you say, it is a conviction, it's a win for him because he'll spin it. He's really good at that.
Potentially. I'm not 100% sure a conviction works in his favor, but I wouldn't.
Yeah.
bet
I don't necessarily think it would either. And there's also the sleeper issue that the Justice Department isn't necessarily likely to follow the 60-day rule that prevents them from prosecuting a candidate 60 days out from an election.
I bet
it
they
would
do.
be gauche.
I bet they do.
Well, we're already seeing some indications of, from DOJ sources and from my colleagues at National Review who are gearing up for the prospect that the Justice Department may just end up prosecuting this thing in the summer, the Jack Smith January 6th false electors case. It would be unprecedented. And I don't know if that wouldn't work in his favor either, because it is a waiving of this longstanding rule.
That's why I think in the end.
But if it's just appearances.
That's why I think in the end Merrick Garland will tell his employee Jack Smith, no, you can't have the not the de facto presumptive nominee, but the actual nominee being prosecuted by his opponent's attorney general in the final days of the campaign. I just don't believe that will happen. I just don't. And I've said that for a long time. I just don't believe. And I know, talked to plenty of people who hate Donald Trump, who don't think it should happen. That not only is it bad politics, but it's a horrible precedent to set for the country. So I still don't believe that trial will take place before the election, and therefore maybe it never will. All right, guys, I'll say again, guys and gals, if you've got questions or comments on the legal stuff, now's the time. Raise your hand. Don't be shy. No bad questions. We want to hear from you. I'll look around to see. If you've got questions, raise your hand. If not, oh, there we go. Rick Hall and Travel Ron, both not raising electronic hands. Travel Ron, I'm going to ask you to unmute and ask your question or make your comment, and then Rick. Go ahead.
Mark, I watched a lot of exit interviews yesterday on the Republican side, and they were asked, did they vote for Trump? No, I would never vote for Trump. How about Biden? Oh, he's really old, but I worry about Kamala Harris. Leads me to believe they'll end up voting for Trump.
Some of them for sure.
So what happens if we swap out Kamala Harris?
Well, I'm gonna let Amie say what I would say, which is it's not gonna happen. Amie, go ahead.
No, it wouldn't happen. She would like it to happen, I think. Secretly,
You think she'd like to be swapped out?
I don't think. I mean, they all want to be king or queen.
Oh, you mean wait, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Ron, do you mean Kamala Harris become the presidential nominee, or she goes off the ticket?
No. There was an article a couple of weeks ago in the Washington Post. FDR did not bring on a sitting vice president in 1944 because he was too radical. Kamala Harris is not radical. But he brought in Harry Truman.
Right.
He
Ka-
cut the VP, a sitting VP. Look,
Kamala Harris does not want to be replaced, and if Joe Biden tried to replace her, the support of the part of the party that loves her would be up in arms over it.
Oh yeah.
So she's not going anywhere. She's not going to become ambassador. She's not going to go on a fictitious Supreme Court vacancy. If Biden runs, she's his running mate, I believe. Amie, you agree?
Oh, 100%, 100%. I think they know that if they messed with Black women in particular, Black women came and supported him in droves in 2020, they would, a lot of people say, oh, what about Newsom kind of leapfrogging her? That would never happen because of that too. I think that they would be in big trouble. But at the same point, like I think that if Kamala Harris were the nominee, they would be in big trouble too. And Democrats will tell you that when they're talking to you. And I think even the president knows. He thinks that he is the only one who can win. And he knows that if his vice president ran, if he dropped out, that it wouldn't be good for Democrats. So
what Amie just said is so important, and it's lost in a lot of the speculation by Republicans and some Democrats about Joe Biden. He believes he'd be the strongest nominee. He believes if he didn't run, she'd likely be the nominee and she'd be weak. And he believes if that didn't happen, if he stepped down, Harris wasn't the nominee, that these other people just can't mount the same campaign he can. And I think he's right at this point. Maybe not a year ago, but I think today he's right. All right, now we got a lot of questions, which is great. So Rick Hall and then Mark Katz. Rick Hall, you first.
Yeah, maybe half question, half comment, Mark, but I would put forth to the group, I'd love to know what the evidence is that he will, that there is a possibility of a hung jury or an acquittal in either of those venues in New York City or Washington, D.C. Is it the $450 million fine, or is it the $83 million judgment in the E. Jean Carroll case? I think those things are so over the top that I just don't know how anyone could rationalize that he could possibly be acquitted in New York or Washington.
Rationalize meaning as a prediction or as justice?
As a prediction. I mean, what is the evidence that
he'll be acquitted?
Yes.
Well, a Staten Island juror who thinks all this is outrageous, for one thing.
Okay.
I'm a big believer in the power of the Staten Island juror. Anybody else have a comment or response to Rick?
Mark, the only thing I say about that is you had there may be a bunch of smart lawyers on this on the Zoom, but I'm not one of them. And somebody on an earlier program of yours was just saying, as a lifetime lawyer who'd had a lot of trials, that finding one hung juror is not that difficult.
Yeah, even in Manhattan. Mark Katz.
Hi, Mark. Thank you.
Hi, Mark.
I wanted to I have a question, but I wanted to share an anecdote that is lost to history. Mark, once upon a time, it was my job to help President Clinton write funny speeches. Jim Kennedy's on the line there. He was part of the process as well. Hi, Jim.
Frequently vetoing your jokes is simply unfunny.
So once upon a time, it was this day before the State of the Union address in 1995, after the 105th Congress and Newt Gingrich's Congress had been elected, and they knew it was going to be an important moment for President Clinton at his State of the Union address to somehow alleviate the tension in the room of having presided over, having lost the Congress for the first time in a generation under his after his first 2 years in office. And I was tasked to go write a joke that would somehow alleviate that tension. And after 100 tries, I came back with a one that finally got a good response, which was they knew that the Republican members of Congress were going to applaud Newt Gingrich, who was sitting directly behind. Oh, they wanted to address the very odd picture of Newt Gingrich sitting over President Clinton's shoulder, and how unnerving that was to some people. And I came into the room with a line was anticipating the Republicans were going to give him wild applause. The president was going to say, I know your applause are not for me, but for the person sitting behind me. Relax, you can hear Al Gore speak another day.
Boom, boom.
Exactly. Now that joke actually was written into the State of the Union, and for reasons I never learned, the president crossed that joke out and never delivered it. But
Is this the first time it's being revealed to history that that joke was in the speech?
no, I once wrote an article about this for
All
the
right.
Daily Beast.
All right. Keep going.
Sorry,
Sorry to interrupt.
sorry to not
Just,
make
just want to make
news.
some news. Sorry, you go. Keep going.
My question is, do we still live in a world where a killer line, is that a line like that aspired to be, or a great speech for that matter, can still change the paradigm or change the narrative? I mean, do these still killer sound bites or these killer ideas still live in a world where, people already, so many more people come to that speech with hardened, concrete ideas about what they're looking about? Is it political science fiction to imagine a great line can really change the world?
That is a great question about the climate, and I'd love everybody to address it. I want to talk about this for a while because I think it's super important. It also, to me, involves performance, right? Barack Obama is an incredible deliverer of comedy, and one of the things he does is he'll tell the joke, he'll wait for the laughter, he'll pause a beat, and then he'll laugh at his own joke, and then he gets another round of laughter. He gets 2 bites at every apple. Brilliant. George Bush, go look at his White House correspondent dinner speeches. Hilarious. And if you spend time with him, Mark McKinnon knows better than all of us. He's hilarious. Donald Trump, I think he's hilarious. I don't know too many Democrats who think he's hilarious, but I think he's hilarious. He's like Don Rickles. And he understands performance. I would say the answer to your question, Mark, is Joe Biden has 2 strikes against him in answering the question, could he go in and deliver a great self-effacing, lower the temperature in the room joke? One is the climate. I don't think there's anything Joe Biden could do that would make Marjorie Taylor Greene laugh. Not a thing. But the other is, I would posit, he's not that funny. He's not that good at delivering performance. And in the last couple of weeks, before they switched to the tactic on diffusing age to be, I may be old, but my ideas are better and Trump's ideas are old. Before it was, I'm going to tell jokes like, I'm twice 40, or, the doctor said I'm 17. I don't find any of that funny. Obviously, humor is a matter of taste, but I just don't think he's got it in him to be like a great comedic performer on the high wire. I open it up to others for your own theater criticism of Joe Biden's comedy chops or not.
I think he once did, but that moment's passed. Like, I've seen Joe Biden be funny, but I don't think
like when Julia Louis-Dreyfus. He's pretty funny in those videos, but he's working with a pro. Tell me when he's been funny. I've known him a long time. I've covered him. There are a lot of things you can say about him positive. I just don't think he's that funny.
Well, people like that kind of like Uncle Joe-ness about him. So I think that is sort of on the table. But I think in this particular race, like I said before, things are so baked in. I don't think there's a lot of room for humor. I don't think he can be funny in a moment like that. I think he has a lot to prove. I think he's tried, like you say, Mark, like he's tried so hard to use humor. I don't know if it's been effective. I don't think it's swayed any voters, but that has been a tack that they have tried at the White House in recent months.
Mark Katz, I want you to weigh in. If you were writing jokes for Joe Biden, like, is he a comedy styling genius, or do you agree with me that it's not his strong suit?
Well, no, it's not as strong. Authenticity is his strong suit.
Yeah.
And the right, I actually do believe in the killer sound. I see less and less reason to believe in it, but I still hold out humor. I was thinking about, what if you could put the words in his mouth, what would they do? I was reminded of a joke. My dad's a dentist. And one of his best friends, I said to him, I hadn't seen him in a long time. I said, Dr. Bloomfeld, you look exactly like you did 20 years ago. And he looks at me, he goes, oh my God, I looked this bad 20 years ago? And I thought it was the funniest thing I ever heard. So I think about that joke and had the DNA and the structure of that joke, and what does it teach us about what Joe Biden might say? I mean, could you take that joke or could he tell that joke verbatim and then pivot to, I may not look like I did 20 years ago, but I feel like the guy you elected 4 years ago.
Right.
I'm the guy who can finish a job.
Could he make a joke about this speaker? Is there some vein of humor to be tapped in Speaker Johnson? Like turn around and do a double take and say, Remind me again who you are, or is
Well,
that too?
okay.
Is that too mean? Is that too mean?
That's a joke I would submit. That's
Yeah.
a funny joke. Thank you, Mark.
Jim
You're
Kennedy,
great.
is that joke funny? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Thumbs up. All right. Jim Kennedy
Or
approval.
the
We can
real
take it.
question
We'll take it
is there
directly to
any
the
favor
president.
he could do? Is there any favor he could do in that moment to his vice president? Just like that joke, that my dead joke about Al Gore, would have done a favor for Al Gore at that moment. Is there an opportunity for him to elevate Kamala Harris in that moment as she's sitting over his shoulder?
With humor, you mean?
With anything.
Yeah. How about this? Because I am just a frustrated White House presidential joke writer. What if when he hands a copy of his speech to Speaker Johnson, an allusion to Nancy Pelosi ripping the speech up, he hands him a pair of scissors and says, just in case to make it easier on you. What do you think? Scissors gag? No?
Rock, paper, or scissors.
Yeah.
That's a gag, but these would all be dissected and criticized. The real question is, is there traction to be had doing any of this stuff? Would it just be understood as a stunt, or would there be an authentic moment that people could connect and relate to that will allow them to, view anew their already hardened opinions?
Yeah. And I don't want to be here to be seen as running Joe Biden down, but I believe his 6 predecessors, all during somewhat partisan times, but less partisan now. But in terms of performance, his 6 predecessors could all have gone in there and done a joke that delivered on what you're talking about better than him. I just don't know that. I just literally from Reagan forward, I think they all were better comedians.
Do you think he's good enough to pull off a single entendre?
I mean, go look at his Seth Meyers performance. What stands out to you as being a brilliant joke when he said like twice, that's classified, how did you know? He's just, not his thing.
Right.
Just not his thing. Do you remember anything from the Meyers interview that stands out to you that you put on his comedy clip reel? Anything?
I missed it. Sorry.
You didn't see it? Did any of the 3 of you see it? Any of the 3 of you remember anything from the Seth Meyers thing where you'd say, we need to put this on your reel to get you a stand-up gig?
Not particularly.
No.
Amie?
No, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the attempt to put on sunglasses that didn't quite work was supposed to be a laugh line. He doesn't do laugh lines anymore. Look, you're right that he has to diffuse the tension, but he's a cantankerous fellow. He's not the winsome guy that he used to be. I think if he were to try to stretch for it, it might look forced, which would even be worse than just a joke that bombs. He's better off conveying authority and trying to lighten the mood by demonstrating that it's morning in America, which is what he needs to convey to the public. If you were to try for laugh lines, I think there's more risk than reward there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mark Katz, sorry. Comedy's not pretty at this moment, apparently, as you suggested.
Politics is easy. Comedy is hard.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark, for participating. And if you haven't read Mark's work, I recommend it to you. He is a very funny guy. All right. Eddie, I saw a hand up, but I can't remember whose it was. I want to talk about RFK, but does anybody have any other questions or comments they'd like to make? If you do, raise your physical or electronic hand. If I see you, I will call on you. Robert Denton, unmute, please, and ask away or comment away.
Yes, 2 quick things. I'm not sure if there's actually the campaigns can be about persuasion anymore. It's about stimulus response, much like advertising. And I don't know if people can really follow and try to persuade someone. Not enough time, not enough money, if you're already there. Which leads me to a question from the standpoint that I would distinguish between a referendum election and a choice election. Mm-hmm. But this one may be more of a base election. If we see what No Labels does, if we see what the third parties do, it may come down that it really is more of a base election than a choice or referendum. And I'm curious reactions of that distinction. Might be too nuanced, I don't know.
No, I mean, I always think it's both. Every election's both. And so, one election compared to another might be more of one. Like 2004, I think leaned a little more towards base, but there's always going to be persuadable voters and base voters who need to be energized. Other folks have a thought on that?
Well, it just doesn't seem like either campaign is especially interested in persuasion. Maybe it's too early in the calendar, and we'll get there around the fall. But it's been a pretty static race at the national level when you're looking at national polls, and both campaigns seem rather resigned to the notion that they win or lose based on how much they can enthuse their own base and depress the other guys, which means it'll be a very, very negative campaign.
Yeah.
I want to talk for a minute about RFK because he's now claiming he's on another battleground state ballot. I still believe that using a super PAC to get ballot access is going to be challenged in the courts and might strike down his success that they say the super PAC has. They haven't been certified by these states. But leaving aside the question of his ballot access, whether he goes the libertarian route, which at this point doesn't seem likely, or whether he gains ballot access through his own campaign in the PAC, I'd love to hear from the three of you. Amie first. No one knows, and I hear people express certainty about this. I scratch my head. In general, what are your thoughts about if RFK is on the ballot, not everywhere necessarily, but in a battleground state? What are your preliminary thoughts about whether that helps Trump or hurts Trump, helps Biden, hurts Biden? Who's helping?
It hurts Biden for sure.
You think it hurts Biden more?
Yeah. I mean, look at Nevada. Trump is winning Nevada right now. If RFK is on the ballot, I think it does hurt Biden. I think he needs to be worried about all these people who think that both of them are no good and they're looking for an alternative. They're thirsty for an alternative. I think that is a very, very real problem for them, and they know it.
Noah, Mark, do you agree unambiguously, which Amie seems to be saying, that it hurts Trump, it hurts Biden more?
Hurts Biden. I agree with that now. The polling is a little weird insofar as Democrats have less of a favorable opinion towards RFK Jr. than Republicans do, but RFK is still drawing probably more from Democrats. And you can't say that's just his name, Kennedy, right? Because most Democrats don't now have a favorable opinion of him. They're just that down on Joe Biden. So the question is, are they that down on him to the point where the Biden campaign and his PACs and his allies have to spend money to define RFK Jr.?
Yeah.
At which point it's a resource suck.
Yeah. Mark McKinnon?
I think it's I think it goes both ways and unclear.
That's what I think.
The data have split.
Yeah.
In recent polling that I've seen, the thing that just shocks me is that in this environment with two such unpopular candidates, that there's not a more viable third-party alternative. It's just stunning that in this environment there hadn't been something emerge other than RFK or Cornel West.
Mark, you and I have both done work with No Labels, who are still talking about a candidate. What are your current thoughts on that?
Reminds me of the 2012 effort. I've always supported, I've always thought that in the greatest democracy in the world, there should be more than two choices. And the system is really rigged against third-party alternatives. If you've ever tried to do it, it costs $50 million plus now. And I appreciate, and I'm not part of No Labels, I haven't been for a long time, but I appreciate the effort to provide an alternative. But you have to have a ticket step up, and the Americans elected this exercise in 2012, and the same thing happened. They paved the road, and then nobody showed up. In that case, there were two more popular nominees, so I'm surprised this time that something hasn't emerged. Okay. But it looks like the options have just about run out. I mean, to me, it makes total sense for Nikki Haley to do it. I don't think she's got a future in the Trump Republican Party, but I don't think she's going to do that. So maybe it's up to Frank La Rosa in Ohio.
Mark, you got dogs and chickens back there, or that was just dogs?
I got it all.
Yeah,
I got it all.
I saw some chickens, I think.
Fresh eggs.
Okay. Robert, thank you. Mark, thank you. And Amie and Noah, thank you. And Amie and Noah are contributors to Two Way, and they've got programs here that you can check out. You can go to the Two Way app or sign up to get notifications. But grateful to you all for joining. I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing tomorrow night. So let me explain it to you. We did this tonight in New Hampshire primary, but it's taking the two-way style conversation to a live event. We'll join you at 8:30 Eastern time. We'll talk for half an hour with some guests and sort of set the stage for the president's speech. Then we'll watch the president's speech together. And we'll do it in a way that during applause or pauses, we can comment a little bit, not in a disrespectful way, but to give everybody the sense that you have when you're home watching by yourself, maybe texting with a few friends. We'll be doing it as a group. We'll watch social media together. We'll watch the network coverage together after the speech to see what people are saying. And again, rather than having to flip around yourself, you can trust me, I'm a pretty good flipper. Then we'll watch the Republican response from the junior senator from Alabama, or I guess she's a senior senator from Alabama, if I remember correctly now. I guess I can't remember either way. I think she's the senior senator. But I believe, as I've said, that there's a good chance she'll be Trump's running mate. I've gone so far as to pretty much guarantee that Katie Britt will be picked. And I've done that largely so when people ask me, I can just give the same answer over and over again about who it's going to be. I do believe that if she does have a good performance, it's going to raise the speculation about her being on the ticket. And they'll notice in Mar-a-Lago, they want to see if she can perform on the big stage. So we'll watch that together. And then again, we'll survey in kind of a crowdsourced way, rely on you all to find good tweets, to find good newspaper headlines, et cetera. So we'll be with you from about 8:30 Eastern to about 11 Eastern, give or take. And I hope you'll join us. Even if you want to watch the coverage separate from us, grab a second screen and follow along and contribute. And like I said, there'll be some great guests with us. Start and end on time always at 12 Eastern time. Thank you all for making time again. Thanks to Mark and to Amie and to Noah and to all your great questions. And we'll see you tomorrow night, 8:30 Eastern time on Two Way. Have a great day.